Happy Friday, everybody. We did a head-to-head points mock draft on the full-length podcast, so let's talk about players in that format. We'll do that next on Fantasy Baseball Today in 5. Welcome into FBT in 5, a podcast that gets you caught up fast on the fantasy news and advice that you need to know. Follow and stream us on Spotify and anywhere else podcasts are found. Today is Friday, March 12th. I am Frank Stanfield, joined by Chris Towers. And let's start with players who see the biggest boost in head-to-head points leagues versus roto or head-to-head categories leagues. Chris, who are some of those players?
Yeah, I think the first thing that you want to know is, especially this season, head-to-head points leagues, starting pitchers are getting pushed way up the boards. And I think, I don't know if there are specific pitchers. There are some specific pitchers who benefit from the head-to-head points league. I think you're looking at guys who don't necessarily get a ton of strikeouts, but they have a lot of volume in their approach. So Lance Lynn, Zach Greinke, Sandy Alcantara, I think those are guys who can really benefit from a head-to-head points format. The other thing would be the key with guys who either gain or lose value. It mostly comes down to two things: plate discipline and speed. If you're fast, you're better in roto. If you have good plate discipline, you're better in head-to-head. And so you can kind of circle first base as the place where players, as a general rule, are better in head-to-head points than roto. And I'm specifically thinking of someone like Rhys Hoskins, who walks a ton, Anthony Rizzo, Carlos Santana, high on base guys who don't necessarily have, the 40 homer upside, but should be good for volume and plate discipline, especially.
You touched on it a little bit already, Chris, in regard to players with speed. Usually those players we prop up a little bit more in roto because stolen bases are so hard to come by. But which players in particular are ones that come to mind that lose the most value in a head-to-head points league?
Yeah, so I think for starting pitchers, you're probably looking at the lower volume elite ratios guys. Your Blake Snell, Tyler Glasnow, Corbin Burns, those guys are probably better in a roto league. So you slide them down a little bit in your head-to-head points league from where you would otherwise take them. And then otherwise it's bad plate discipline guys who, not necessarily, it's just bad plate discipline guys. The stolen bases count for 2 points in head-to-head points. So they're still valuable. But, you're Adalberto Mondesi, Luis Robert, Teoscar Hernandez, guys who are, definite top 100 picks. You might see them go outside of the top 100 in a head-to-head points format. And, if they fall far enough, I got Adalberto Mondesi at like 158 in that points draft you were talking about earlier. I think that's really good. I think he's one of the, 14 viable starting caliber shortstops in that format.
So we've referenced this draft a few times already. You mentioned you got Adalberto Mondesi as your starting shortstop. Give me, if you have an overarching theme or a strategy when you are drafting in head-to-head points, or maybe even just run through how that mock draft went for you.
Yeah, I think that mock draft was indicative of my approach. I went very heavy on elite hitters and then filled in my starting pitching so that 5 of my first 10 picks were starting pitchers, but it was like my 4th pick, my 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, rather than, the way most everyone else in this draft was going, which was starting pitcher really heavy in the first 50 picks. I was able to get some elite bats, and I still felt okay about my starting pitching staff. So if I had to sum up my strategy in a head-to-head points league, it's generally true of all leagues. I want to zig when the rest of the league is zagging. And so if everyone's pushing starting pitchers up the board, I'm happy to end up with 3 first-round caliber hitters on my team like I did in this head-to-head points league.
And who were those hitters that you wound up with? I believe it was.
I have to look that
Juan
up.
Soto, Bryce Harper, and Manny Machado.
Juan Soto, Bryce Harper, and Manny Machado with the 5th, 20th, and 29th overall picks. I think all of those guys could very easily be top 10 players in this format next season. So, yeah, my pitching staff's a little light. Hyunjin Ryu is my number 1 starter, but nobody can touch the high end of my offense.
Scott White is not going to like your pitching staff, but that offense is really awesome. For more extensive fantasy baseball coverage, listen to the Fantasy Baseball Today podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, your smart speakers, and anywhere else podcasts are found. And thanks for listening to Fantasy Baseball Today in 5. This is your audio outlet for fantasy news and advice in just 5 minutes. If you enjoyed the pod, please leave a 5-star review on Apple. We'll be back again on Monday morning. Bye-bye.